Hello, Trail Seeker, and welcome to another exciting episode of the Learn True Health podcast. Today's episode is really awesome. We have Dr. Wendie Trubow with us today, who, through her own healing journey, discovered a unique way of focusing on supporting the body's ability to detox, heal the thyroid, balance hormones, especially for women going through perimenopause or menopause, and just how to get on the other side of feeling poopy to the point where you're feeling awesome. Another big thing we talk about is that these toxins can lead to abdominal fat and can lead to depression and can lead to fatigue. And so many of us are running around getting our coffee fix in the morning, getting a sugar fix in the afternoon, sort of self-medicating fatigue, not realizing that fatigue is a symptom of toxicity overload, and that by doing simple things, daily simple things with our lifestyle and our diet and our nutrition, little fun life hacks, that we can maximize our body's ability to heal itself, maximize the body's ability to detox and balance hormones and feel amazing. Wendie, after our interview, said, "Oh no, I forgot to tell everyone about this freebie that I'm giving away." So I want you to know to go to her website, 5journeys.com/promo. And I'll make sure that the link for that is in the show notes of today's podcast at learntruehealth.com. If you're listening on a podcast directory, just click details or show notes and it'll all show up there. I'll make sure that's there. Another thing we talk about is one of my absolute favorite tools that I've used to help on my healing journey, because I realized that a lot of my health issues were from toxins, specifically heavy metals. And that's something we talked about in the interview, so you're going to love learning about that. But the thing Wendie and I both use, is a sunlight and sauna. Now, I've been raving about sunlight and saunas for about 4-5 years now. And the reason why is I kept having these really weird episodes where I'd taste heavy metals in my mouth, my liver would become distended, I'd feel very toxic and very sick. And finally, one of my doctors, one of my naturopaths, just turned to me and said, you should really use a sauna because you sweat out these toxins and it bypasses the liver and the kidneys. I thought, this is amazing. So when I started to dive into studying the sunlight and sauna specifically, because I was looking at all the saunas and I kept hearing sunlight and, well, why the sunlight and sauna over every other sauna system out there is it has this incredible patented technology that allows for the full spectrum infrared to be absorbed by your body efficiently. There's actually receptors on your cells. We talk about this in my interview with Dr. Khan, who's a cardiologist, and he uses sunlight and saunas with his patients. And he says that on each cell in the body, there's receptors for light, which just like boggles my mind, right? Because you can't like pour me a cup of light, sunlight, right? Like pour me a cup of infrared, right? You can't drink it, right? You can't take it. And so we always think that something physical, like things you eat, things you drink, it's a physical, tangible thing you can hold. That's something that the trillions of cells in your body would absorb and utilize. But then there's this medium that our body absorbs and utilizes that is a light spectrum. And isn't that just wild? Well, if you think about it, light is energy and our body is made up of energy. So that makes total sense. Well, when looking at the studies, and there are so many studies, and then Sunlighten also has worked with doctors and researchers to come up with some studies of their own. But the Journal of Athletic Enhancement published a study of 10 national power level athletes, and they found that the infrared improved the neuromuscular performance during intense training, and that balanced and increased the testosterone to cortisol ratio. And they found that these athletes recovered faster, built more muscle, and could train harder when every day using the infrared system. There's another study published by a top researcher in infrared technology, Dr. Michael Hamblin, and he says that after looking at muscle mass and muscle gain, they did find that with the Sunlighten system, that there was increased muscle gain after training and decreased inflammation and oxidative stress, which is exciting because the other day, so normally I've just been using my Sunlighten for heavy metal detox and it has all these other benefits I kept hearing about, but mainly I was like, I feel really good when I get out of my sauna, and for hours later I feel really good, like I got a massage good. I've been using it to detox heavy metals gently out of the body. So it's good me time. I feel amazing. I know it decreases stress. I know there's all these other health benefits, but that's pretty much been my focus. Well, the other day I did 2 workouts back to back at the gym. Like it was like Tuesday and Wednesday, and I did a lot of leg work and my legs were really sore. It was kind of hard to walk up the stairs. And then I remembered, oh yeah, I've heard these studies about using the Sunlighten system to recover faster from athletics. So I jumped in my system that night and I set it to the relaxation program because I was about to go to bed. I didn't want to I don't want, because sometimes when I do the certain programs, I'm like more awake. So it's good to do it in the morning for some programs. But this one, I wanted a gentle sweat. I just hit the relaxation and it was very gentle. It was very, it's like, it's easy to breathe. It's not very hot. It's warm. You feel nice and warm, like you're in a cocoon. And I enjoyed it. It was very gentle. It had the full spectrum, so it was near, mid, and far infrared. And then afterwards, I felt great. And as I was walking around, I took a shower and I went to bed. I noticed, I don't have any pain in my muscles anymore. That's good. But the next day I woke up and I should have, normally, I would have had more soreness. Because, 2 days after an exercise, I worked out really hard that Tuesday. So by Thursday, I should have really felt, because Tuesday and Wednesday, I was doing a lot of work. So by Thursday and Friday, I should have really have had more muscle soreness. I had zero muscle soreness after being in the sauna. And I thought, oh my gosh, now I'm definitely going to use the system after every workout. I've seen these studies, but I never had that personal experience until now. So I thought that was really cool. It also helps with weight loss. And I always heard that, like, oh, it's good because you're sweating and you're burning calories. But I read this study, fascinating, that it increases a type of protein that stimulates the breakdown of fats, of these lipids within inside the fat cells, the adipose tissue. It stimulates the breakdown of that, so it can be transported and then to the liver, and then the body can convert that fat and get rid of it. And so I thought that was really neat because it's actually stimulating the chemistry of the body to go through the process of burning fat. And then with anti-aging, it stimulates collagen production. So a lot of women love, and men that want to look great too. Stimulates the collagen production. So women notice they have less fine lines and wrinkles. My big rave about the Sunlighten system is that it decreases stress significantly. So it helps with mental, emotional health as well. Especially in the last year, I've been going through a ton of stuff and emotionally, and using it has greatly helped me to just calm myself down. You ever been so stressed out that and the thing is, stress is not emotion. So you're just walking around, but you're stressed because someone does something and you just snap at them. And it's like you're incredibly irritable and it's like you have a short fuse. That is a symptom of being in a high state of stress. And so I noticed that after using the Sunlighten sauna every day, once a day, I noticed that, it just brought it down. So my fuse is longer. I'm more patient. I don't snap at people. I'm very slow to anger, right, as opposed to quick to anger. So those are signs that you've decreased stress in the body. And as Dr. Wendie points out today in our interview, the body cannot tell the difference between a mental stress, emotional stress, physical stress, all the kinds of stressors in the body. It's just a soup of stress. So whether you're having physical stress or whether you're having a really hard time emotionally or mentally, sometimes even spiritual stress, the body takes it to heart, and it's all the same to the body. The body's going to go through a state of stress no matter what. And so doing things to decrease stress, like walking, prayer, meditation, sunlight and sauna, awesome. They all help the body to decrease that. What I really like about the Sunlighten, compared to other saunas, because I've been in the sauna at my gym, which is way too hot. It feels like I'm trying to breathe in Vegas in July. It's just way too hot. It's hard to breathe. What I like about the sunlight is you can sweat at low temperatures. When I say low temperatures, I mean low temperatures for a sauna. But when I breathe in the sunlight at night, I'm always surprised that it's not, I don't sense any hot air going into my lungs, right? It's not hot. It's a very comfortable temperature. And you can ask my husband, I do not like feeling hot. I immediately turn the AC on when I get in the car. I'm just one of those people. I don't like feeling hot, but there's something about the sunlight that's different. So if you're one of those people who's like, well, I don't like feeling hot, you might actually really enjoy the sunlight because it's very gentle. It's very it's just warm, and then all of a sudden you're sweating because the infrared technology, the near mid and far infrared technology is getting into the cells and warming you up from the inside. Your core temperature goes up 1 degree for an hour after your session. So it's doing all this fantastic work inside you even after you leave the sauna, and they see that for 24 hours it has this protective response for the whole body and for the cardiovascular system. This is such cool information, and Dr. Wendie agrees with me that it's so great to use this type of therapy to detox the body from stress and from toxins in a natural way. When I interviewed Connie Zach, the founder of Sunlighten, I asked for her to give my listeners a really good discount, and she did. And she's honored that for years, for I think it's been 5 years now. So she gives free shipping, and she throws in some extra gifts. Call the company and ask them and find out what kind of really great deal that they're providing for the listeners, because they always make sure that they take care of you guys. And you can also, if you want to go to the link, learntruehealth.com/sunlightensauna. That's learntruehealth.com/sunlightensauna. If you have any questions for me, I'd love to answer them. Come join the Facebook group, the Learn True Health Facebook group. We're like 50 people away from reaching 5,000 people, which is, it doesn't sound like a lot of people. We have a lot more listeners. I guess not everyone's on Facebook. We have a lot more listeners than that. But what's cool about our Facebook group is people are so active and helpful. It's a fun community where people are really supporting each other. So if you want to join a Facebook group that's not toxic, we do not attract that kind of person. It's very supportive, very loving, very understanding, healing community. Everyone's sharing their information and asking questions and learning from each other. And I'm very active in that group. So if you have any questions about the Sunlighten system or anything that Dr. Wendie shared today or anything about my experience with detox and transformation, please come join the Facebook group. You can do that by going to learntruehealth.com/group, or you can just search Learn True Health in Facebook. And if you've been a longtime listener, you may have noticed that this last week we launched our new and improved website. It was a big endeavor. I wanted to make the website even more accessible for you. So we completely revamped it and updated it. The search function is working a lot better than before. So please take your questions to the search function on the website, type in the topics you're interested in, find your episodes. We're almost at 500 episodes. It's so exciting that your answers are there for you, and we're here to help. So join the Learn True Health Facebook group, and I look forward to seeing you there. Thank you so much for sharing these episodes with those you care about. By sharing, we're spreading this information. My goal is to help as many people as possible to learn true health. I would love to turn this ripple into a tidal wave and help millions of people to transform their lives. And you're a part of that. We are all a part of this ripple effect to help as many people as possible. Have yourself a fantastic rest of your day and enjoy today's interview. Welcome to the Learn True Health podcast. I'm your host, Ashley James. This is episode 482. I am so excited for today's guest. We have with us today Dr. Wendie Trubow, who specializes in detox. But I have a feeling this detox is going to be a totally different conversation than what we're used to. You know, we've talked about detox dozens of times from many different angles, and this angle, and I love this because Dr. Trubow started off specializing in women's health, right? And we're going to hear your story, but what I do know is that your personal experience led you to dive into holistic medicine and discover that detox was the most important thing we really, really need to focus on, and supporting those systems of our body so that we can get on the other side of ill health. So I'm really excited to jump into this. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. And feel free to call me Wendie during the show. You don't have to call me doctor.
Well, it's a hard-earned title, but I'm happy to call you Wendie. I know that as a medical doctor, you went through excruciating years of higher education and indoctrination into the pharmaceutical industry, and somehow you managed to unbrainwash yourself to the point where you realize that there's this whole world of healing out here beyond drugs. So congratulations, you're one of the few amazing medical doctors that made it out the other side.
Thank you. I think there should be a bumper sticker like I survived med school and residency. I think that should be a bumper sticker because I really like I lived through it, but I did not thrive through it. I can't say that I survived. That's all I did.
Well, it's not really an environment for thriving, is it? It really is excruciating what they do, and it definitely jades a lot of doctors end up jaded, right? Through residency. They could kind of go into becoming a doctor like with, beautiful dreams of helping people, and then through residency they're just completely torn apart. But here something happened in your life, and I really want to dive into this because I think your story will resonate with all of us. Something happened in your life that had you need to go beyond your medical school training to find out how to heal. So I'd love to dive right in and learn more about what happened to you.
I love sharing this story because it's what it really underscores. So first I'll say is, Ashley, is that there's my health story has two peaks. Okay. And the first one, well, let me back up a step. I want to underscore it's really hard to recognize when you're going off the cliff unless you have a particular worldview that only accepts optimal health. Okay. So I didn't have that worldview when I went off the cliff for the first time. And so it literally took me years to recognize that all was not right in Wendie land until I got to a point where I thought to myself, oh my God, I have to get up today. I have to get up every day. But I'm so tired. And I got up because I was the primary breadwinner. That's why I got out of bed. Otherwise, I would have stayed in bed. Sex drive, forget about it. I had head to toe issues. I was losing my hair. My brain wasn't working. I had anxiety. Now, I'm high strung. I am not anxious. I just happen to be like go, 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 high energy. I had a thyroid dysfunction where it was totally normal. I had heart palpitations, asthma, bloating, gas, diarrhea, constipation, sometimes all on the same day, right? Have diarrhea, then be constipated, then have diarrhea later. Like, go figure. I had really heavy periods. I had difficulty conceiving. I made up for that one. And then I had wasting and nutritional deficiencies. So I was really a mess. And that happened when I was 35. And I was a year and a half out of residency. And I did go off the cliff in residency, but again, worldview, I didn't have the view that I was supposed to feel amazing, so I kind of just tolerated feeling all these things. And the other thing that I'll highlight, Ashley, is that it doesn't happen overnight for most of us. It's not like Monday I feel amazing, Tuesday I feel terrible. What happened? I got to look into this. No, it was this slow deterioration of my health. Okay. So I'm 35, I'm barely getting out of bed, and my husband says to me, why don't you go see my mentor, who was one of the old-time functional medicine doctors in Massachusetts. He was mentoring my husband. And our insurance was changing, and he took our insurance that we were leaving, so we kind of rushed it and got me in for an appointment. And he did what I considered at the time to be a ridiculous workup. This is before functional medicine in my world. And he worked at food sensitivities, minerals, nutrients. And one thing that he did that he didn't even talk to me about was he tested me for celiac. And it was positive. And on the car ride up, I'm 6 weeks postpartum. I'm like about to lose my mind. I said to my husband, call him. I need to know what's wrong. I can't wait any longer. Now, I've waited 6 weeks, mind you, but I can't wait another minute. And I said to him, You got to call him. So my husband calls him and says, all right, I'm sorry, but Wendy's freaking out here. Is there anything major that we should know about before we walk into the office? And he's like, yeah, she has celiac disease. And I said, oh, my dad has celiac disease. And he says, well, it's genetic. You probably should have been tested. And I was like, oops. So at 35, I got diagnosed with celiac disease and went gluten-free. I want to pause there because sometimes that's a lot to unpack, and we haven't even really gotten to peak 2. That's just peak 1. So anything there that you're...
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important to look at our family history, not from the standpoint of, oh, because my dad had heart disease, that means I'm going to have heart disease, or because my grandma had diabetes, I'm going to have diabetes. But it's really important to look at it as the genetics don't necessarily cause, like, are the it's not like the gun, the trigger that pulls the gun, right? It's the nutrient deficiencies, the foods you're exposed to, you typically eat about the same way. We typically have the same nutrient deficiencies as our family. And so if your family has these issues, it's really, really good to eat a diet that's corrective, to do lifestyle that's corrective and preventive of those issues. And what I've heard over and over again is not only celiac, but gluten intolerance. So the intolerance, it's not necessarily celiac, but it's just an intolerance to it, is often, more than not often seen. If a mother has it, all the kids have it. Same with dairy intolerance. It's like something like 51 or 52% of the population of the earth should not in any way, shape, or form be drinking breast milk from any animal, right? So any kind of milk from any animal. And yet we do. And so if there's one person, like I see these moms who are like, well, little Johnny is allergic to milk, so we don't give him milk, but the rest of the family does. And I'm like, that doesn't make sense, because if he has dairy intolerance, or if you had dairy intolerance as a kid, it's more likely that all your children have it. And sometimes their symptoms are masked because they're also eating a bunch of sugar, and they're also, there's a bunch of other allergens. And it takes time. You got to remove these food sensitivities, right? Remove those grains and the dairy and the eggs. Those are the most common ones, right? Remove them for quite a while. I believe that certain immunoglobulin responses or hyper responses are have a 60-day half-life. Some of them are 30 days, some of them are 6 days. So it's like it takes a while to really calm the body down. And it's not that big of a deal. Like, I know some parents freak out. I wouldn't know what to feed him if I can't feed him sugar, right? If I can't feed him a bunch of cereal and dairy every day. It's like, you'll figure it out. I don't know. Try fruit. But this is so common that we overlook that our major health issues could be something that's like, oh yeah, my mom is allergic to that, or my mom had to avoid that, or my dad had to avoid that. Maybe I should, right? And this is what drives me up the wall, is that how many you're a doctor, right? But how many doctors did you see? And you yourself are a doctor, so you saw yourself. It's kind of hard to treat yourself, right?
You can't treat yourself. No, you totally can't treat yourself.
But
it's really hard.
What drives me up the wall is that in all your medical training, there wasn't a class that was like, okay, we're going to talk about food sensitivities and allergies and how we can help our patients to dial in their diet for the most optimal healing, right? That class doesn't exist.
No, and we had like 2 hours of nutrition training. That was it.
Drives me crazy. So, okay, so you're in the car, you've been given this, and all of a sudden the light bulb goes on. Do you have a glimmer of hope? Do you feeling like, hey, maybe this is the answer?
I don't think of things like that. It's so funny, I'm 51 and a half, and I look at those years like a blur, because I was in the midst of so many really all-encompassing projects. So the biggest project was reproducing. So I was either pregnant or nursing for 11 years.
Wow.
I know. So, and I have 4 kids. So y'all can do the math.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So that's why I say I made up for that infertility stuff, or fertility challenges, we should say. So that was kind of in my face, right? I'm trying to grow and feed and raise a lot of little people. So that was really encompassing. And then the next part to that is I was a new attending doctor, so I had to prove myself. Then the next layer to that is my husband let me think about this. What's the timeline? About 4 years into my career as an attending, my husband decided he wanted to open a functional medicine center. And so we opened this huge place that grew to be the largest functional medicine provider in the country. Cool. And went on that roller coaster for 7 years. And then that closed in 2015. And that's, I feel like when I woke up, because my kids all of them were weaned. So I was no longer the human like food, what?
Creator.
Slot machine. Yeah. I was no longer the human vending machine. Like, oh, I'll have a snack now. And it's free. It's open 24/7. So
she doesn't need to sleep.
No, I remember craving unbroken sleep in those days. So I didn't look at it, honestly, Ashley, in those early days. I was just trying to survive. I was on the roller coaster of life. I had zero brain space. I could gauge how overwhelmed I was by how long it took me to book an appointment for something. And I remember saying to my hairdresser, if you don't make me book an appointment before I leave, you literally won't see me for 9 months because I'm just too overwhelmed to even think of calling you. So that was sort of the barometer for my life. So, it's like, and one thing feeds the next, right? You don't feel well. So it's hard to then take care of yourself. And if you don't take care of yourself, then you're not going to feel well. So you circle the drain. And that was me, circling the drain. So getting rid of gluten was very impactful because I noticed tremendous improvement head to toe immediately. But I always say to patients, it's like that shark's mouth. Sharks have 7 rows of teeth, and when one tooth falls out, the next tooth moves forward to take its place. And that's what it's like when you're untangling your health. So you have layer number 1, cool, gluten. Guess what? Layer number 2 was candida. And layer number 3 was dysbiosis. So I kind of worked through those and worked on my gut for, let's think about this, 13 years. And I was doing pretty good. Pretty good. I had gotten to a place where I was still extremely, and I still am extremely reactive to gluten, but I felt pretty good. Okay. So fast forward from age 35 to 48 when peak 2 happens. And peak 2, we go on the trip of a lifetime. Now, just so you know, I have 4 kids and we travel with both of our mothers. So it's not just like a romantic getaway. It's like a soccer team. We show up. There's all of us. So we go on this amazing vacation in 2019 to Paris, and we spend a week right around Notre Dame. And the month after I came home. Now, whenever I go on vacation, I work really hard to stay on the eating plan that works for me. So I generally don't gain weight on vacation. So I came home, same weight, fine. But the month after I came home, I gained 9 pounds. And half the hair on my head started falling out in droves, like crazy amounts.
Wow.
And I had a rash on my face that would not quit. And what do women care about? Hair, skin, weight. That's what'll get you to the doctor, right? Like you could have a blood pressure of 200 over 100, but you're like, yeah, it's been that high before, but I just gained 6 pounds. Doc, I need an appointment tomorrow, right? So I freaked. And of course, what's the number one thing when you gain weight? Thyroid. So here's where you can treat yourself, but you can't treat yourself. So I start to do my tests. And by the way, I'm 48 at that point. So I'm perimenopause and I'm like, damn hormones. So I check my hormones. They're perfect. I check my thyroid. It's perfect. And now I'm like, maybe I'll do a stool test. Maybe because your gut runs your body, right? So I start to do a stool test. It looks, for me, really darn good. So now I'm totally stymied. And I spend a month or so sort of flailing around like, what am I doing? What's wrong here? Maybe it's just perimenopause, right? Chalk it up. And I'm listening to the radio one day and I hear this report about how when Notre Dame burned down, it released 500 pounds of lead dust into the air. And the closer you were to Notre Dame, the more lead exposure you got. And the farther away, the less you got. Makes sense, right?
No.
Yes. And I looked at my
Way.
husband and I was like, we spent a week there right after it burned. I got a lead exposure and that threw me off the cliff. And he's like, maybe. I'm like, don't maybe me. That's what happened. So I did the testing. And all right, doctors are bad patients, Ashley. That's all I have to say. Bad doctor. So I had previously done a lead and mercury heavy metals testing on myself, and it was mildly positive. So we in our practice treat when the levels are over 8. And I tested at 9 for lead a million years before. And I was like, meh, it's kind of a pain in the butt program. I'm not going to treat for a just slightly positive level. Knowing now what I didn't know then is that often the first numbers you get when you're someone who doesn't detox well, the first numbers you get are often just the tip of the iceberg. And I didn't realize that then. So I blew it off. Okay. So my number was 9 years ago. And then I do this test after going to Notre Dame and my level was 25% higher. That got my attention because I would treat at 12. So I said to my husband, oh my God, I have lead. Oh, and mercury, by the way. Why go for just half of the bad ones? I'll go for everything. I didn't have cadmium. I didn't have arsenic, and I didn't have thallium. Those are really the ones we look at, all 5 of those. And then I started to think about, well, what other toxins are there? And so I did mycotoxins, which are the mold toxins that when you get exposed to mold, it puts out toxins in your body. Those are called mycotoxins. So I did the testing for that, and I had 4 strains of mycotoxins. And now I'm really ticked. And I start treatment, and I got so much better. Like my hair loss slowed, my rash quieted down. Here's the really cool part. I used to be the canary in the coal mine for gluten. So I never went out to eat because I got so sick anywhere. And so I don't know why I tested it out. And instead of having a 3-month recovery to gluten, I started to notice that my recovery was, instead of 3 months, it was 6 weeks. And then it was 2 weeks. And then it was 10 days. And then it was 5. And then it was 2. And then it was 24 hours. And then it was like 12 hours, which sounds pretty awful when you think about like brain fog and diarrhea. But on the other hand, when you compare it to, I used to do that for 3 months, it was such a different world.
Yep.
So I did these treatment for mycotoxins and heavy metals. And it's hard, honestly. Like my whole life was organized around detox. Get up, do something an hour later. I did something throughout the day for months. And when I retested, I was like, oh my, because the levels of lead were so much higher and mercury was so much higher. And that's really when we started to dive into, right, if you're not detoxing, it's just the tip of the iceberg that your body's able to sort of squeeze out, just luckily squeeze out. And then the last part of this is that when I retested my mycotoxins after a year, sort of occurred to me like, oh, they also have environmental toxins testing and testing for pesticides. So why don't I do that at the same time? In for a penny, in for a pound. Let's just do it all. So my retest, when I did that, I did the others and was like, oh my, it's never good news here. And I had a whole bunch of those things to deal with. So I've been systematically addressing and removing things. And so what I'll say is it's a long process, A. B, it's a rewarding process. C, I've lost more weight than I gained, right? So I gained 9 pounds and I lost 15 pounds when my weight finally shifted. But it took 2.5 years into the process before my weight shifted. And I think that's really important for the listeners, because whenever someone comes and says, I can't lose weight and my thyroid's normal, I'm like, great, then you've most likely got toxins, but it's going to be a couple years till your body quiets down. It's not immediate.
That's been my experience with my own health. Every doctor I've gone to, and I go to naturopaths and like holistic doctors, every doctor's like, I walk in the door, oh, thyroid, you are thyroid, classic thyroid, ha ha ha. And I'm like, no, actually, every test I've ever done, my thyroid's fantastic. And they kind of look at me like they're going to be the doctor that fixes my thyroid, right? And then the blood work comes back and they're like, oh, okay. you were right. And then I show them all the previous blood tests, and my thyroid's fine. Everything's fine. Everything on all my blood tests are fine. And what I finally figured out was I have just major heavy metals to the point where
Yep.
I'd wake up anytime I did like weight loss, I could taste heavy metals. I'd wake up tasting them in my mouth, kind of like an ashtray. Like I would just like whatever you imagine that would taste like. It was horrible. And then I could smell, it would smell like my body would exude a smell of burning rubber, like if cars were spinning out, that burning rubber smell, or
Yep.
like burning garbage. That's what my body would smell like. And then my liver would distend to the point where you could see it pushing out from behind the rib cage, and it was hard as a rock. And one of my doctors wanted to do a biopsy. We did an ultrasound. They're like, your liver's just pissed off. There's nothing wrong here. We don't find anything wrong here. It's just pissed off. My gallbladder was fine, but my liver was hard as a rock and pushing out. And that's when it all clicked, because I had to do my own sleuthing, because every doctor I went to was like, oh, thyroid. I'm like, are you kidding me? And it finally clicked. I'm like, well, I'm tasting heavy metals. My liver is pissed off, and I have MTHFR, right? That's just one of the many things I'm sure
Me
attribute
too.
to poor detox, which is what I want to talk about. I want to talk about why is it that some people can detox. Like, it's so funny. There's this woman I know who's very similar story to you. If she was in the same room as gluten, she'd be in bed for 6 months. Like, she's just everything. She's so reactive. She's constantly having to work on her health. Constantly, constantly, constantly. Her husband, all he eats is pizza. All he drinks is beer. He is fine. He is the picture of health. Why is it that some people are easily overburdened with toxins, unable to, like, the liver's unable to process them, and no matter how seemingly, no matter how healthy they feel they eat, they're still it's just like this uphill battle with detox? Why are some people like that way, and other people could spend their entire lives through the drive-in or drive-through and like rarely get a cold? So what is this? And I've always heard it's the microbiome. Everything, the microbiome's everything. If you have a good microbiome, then you're good. But there's so much more than that.
Okay. Before I answer that question, I have to ask you something. Can I call you Ash?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Okay, Ash. So we were privileged enough to interview Alessio Fasano for our podcast. And legit, when I first read one of his papers, I said to my husband, this dude's going to get the Nobel Prize. And I was like, I've been a groupie for the last 10 years of his. I love him to pieces. And he's, this like beautiful Italian man with the accent, and he does great research, and he's all about gluten. And so one of the things that he talks about is, yes, it is your microbiome, and it's a triad. So you have the triad of the microbiome health, which really is a term for gut permeability. Okay. So that's what we're looking at, is the permeability of the gut. And let's come back to that, because I want to make sure we talk about the triad, and then we'll talk about each component. So the gut permeability combined with a genetic susceptibility combined with a trigger. That's your triad. So you can have people, 40% of the population has the MTHFR gene, and like 40% of the people have the gene for celiac. But very few people actually are diagnosed with celiac, although the number is much higher than suspect. Basically, there's more people with celiac than know they have celiac. They just haven't been diagnosed. But basically, when you put that together, the thing that seems to set it off is not your genetics. It's actually your gut permeability. So this is where the science gets so cool. And so in your gut, if you're someone who carries a gene for celiac, that's that's DQ2 or DQ8 positive. It's on the HLA subtype of antigens. If you have that, then you upregulate these receptors called CXCR3. I don't know why they named it that, but that's the name. Now, when you eat gluten as someone with the gene and now the upregulation of these receptors, you have more receptors that bind to the gluten particle. So it's actually the gliadin in the gluten, and that upregulates something called zonulins. Zonulins are a substance. Now, in order to tell you what they do, I have to tell you the significance. So, zonulins dissolve the tight junctions in your gut.
Yes.
Okay, so your gut from your mouth to your anus is essentially one cell wall thick, which is crazy to think. You think you have this whole big barrier between you and the outside world, but no. There's one cell wall that's each cell is stuck tightly to its neighbor. And that lines your entire GI tract. Now, if you have the genes for celiac and you eat gluten, you upregulate the receptors, and then zonulin gets pumped out. Zonulin dissolves the tight junctions, and now the outside world is being exposed to your inside world. Okay? Are you with me so far?
Mm-hmm.
So now what's really interesting is anyone who eats gluten opens up their tight junctions for about 15 minutes. Anyone, genes or not. But if you have the genes, you open your tight junctions for like 4 hours. And so what that means is that when you look at people eating a standard American diet, what'd you eat for breakfast? Bagel, cereal. Okay. What'd you eat for lunch? Sandwich. What'd you eat for dinner? Pasta with chicken and broccoli. Or lasagna or pizza. You basically, if you're someone who's genetically at risk, you've opened your tight junctions for the entire day. So the outside world, meaning bacteria, toxins, hormones, whatever, right? Food particles, you can pretty much start naming them. All of those things are getting into your bloodstream. And your bloodstream's like, what in the holy name of, what is this? This is not me. This is not part of what I want to do. This is not normal. Your body starts to generate an immune response. And then things go haywire. So your body starts to attack everything because it's like confused, basically. Okay? So one major part of the triad is genetic susceptibility combined with the gut permeability, and then anything that gets through the gut serves as a trigger. Unless you went to Notre Dame right after it burned and got a huge lead load. And here's where those three things don't adequately explain everything, okay? Because the next layer to it, I always describe it like your health is the sandwich, the gluten-free sandwich of a bun, a gluten-free bun, and that bun is your environment and your genetics and epigenetics, and we can talk about epigenetics in a minute, and the meat of that sandwich, or if you're a vegetarian, the vegetables of that sandwich are your sleep, your thoughts, your gut health, your nutrient status, your ability to move your body, your intimacy with others, how often you poop, all the stuff about you is the meat or vegetables of that sandwich. Put that all together, and all of that is influencing whether you're going to be someone who can do drive-through for their life, eat Dunkin' Donuts. I'm in Boston, so it's Dunkies. It's been Dunkies since I was a kid. So if you can go to Dunkies every day and get a coffee and a donut, or if you're someone who just driving by Dunkies is going to make you sick like me. So layer that onto it all kind of is mushed in. And I always say to people, it's hard to tease out the exact thing because think of yourself like a blended soup. You can no longer pull out one ingredient because it's all blended together.
Right.
That's your health. Okay.
Before we move forward, I really want to unpack what you said because I think it's the most impactful. This is if I want every single listener to really, really sit with, and including myself, to sit with what you just said for a moment and just really unpack it. So when you say from your mouth to your anus, which is one long tube, right? So we're kind of like a donut if you think about it, because we always think that when you put stuff in your mouth and you swallow, it's, quote unquote, inside your body, but it's actually not inside your body. It's a tube. And that tube is the kind of like the outside world in a sense, right? Because it's like we're like this, like we're kind of a pool noodle. We're like a pool noodle. We are a pool noodle. And so, and when you say that from your mouth to your anus, it's the only protection we have from the outside world. I mean, besides things like stomach acid, which hopefully kill things, right? Is this one layer of epithelial tissue, right? Like it's a type of skin. Is it like, can we just get an image in our mind? Is it like the thickness of a hair, or is it
Thinner. No, it's
thinner,
thinner.
thinner than that?
Thinner.
Is it so thin that we can't visibly see it with the human eye?
Correct.
So
Correct.
we have a layer protecting us from all the craziness of the world that's thinner than what we can perceive with the human eye. And when we eat barley, wheat, rye, and I'm going to say oats because they contain gliadin.
And they're often cross-contaminated too.
Right. So
Yeah.
let's just like throw out this notion of marketing, which is gluten-free oats. Just throw it out because oats do the damage too. So barley, wheat, rye, and oats. If we eat anything with it, even if you don't have celiac, let's say you are the luckiest person, you won the genetic lottery and you have perfect genes, perfect digestion. It's still, even with perfect genes and perfect digestion, causes leaky gut for 15 minutes.
Yep.
So that tiny, imperceivable with the human eye barrier between your insides, your bloodstream and your lymph system, your immune system, and what you're eating, that barrier is dissolved slightly, right? The junctions are weakened, and food particles that are not fully digested are allowed to enter into your body, and then your immune system freaks out, has to attack it, and then that causes this cascade of inflammation and your immune system freaking out, and that can trigger all kinds of things, and that's for the healthy people. So is that?
But don't forget, not just food. It's food and bacteria and molds and toxins and something that you walked by, a perfume that you inhaled, that, anything you swallowed, any chemicals in your water. It's any chemical and toxin, not just food.
Can we also dare to say parasites?
Yep. Have at it. Anything that you can ingest, you can absorb.
All right. So basically the outside world, the crazy toxic outside world is getting into our bloodstream, and our body has to deal with it, and our liver has no idea what's going on, and then that has to figure out how to deal with it. And that's for the healthy people. And then the unfortunate people, which, likely if you're listening to a podcast, you're not one of those people who is, always healthy, never sick, right? Like those people aren't motivated necessarily to listen.
Right.
It's all of us who are like, on working on ourselves, right? Like I'm on a health journey. I've healed a lot. You've healed a lot, but we're not done. We're not done healing, right? We're still growing. We're still getting better and better. And all my listeners, I know you're still getting better and better. So we can't be gluten-free once in a while, because that once in a while is still enough to cause this triggering, right? So we need to really be diligent. And even when we're in the restaurant, we need to be hyper diligent and not consume these, because it causes even 15 minutes of that tiny layer of protection. It, like, removing that that just really blows my mind. I've talked to so many doctors about being gluten-free and why, but you explained it in such a way that is so understandable. And I think of so many people who are like, oh yes, I'm gluten-free, but like once a week I eat gluten, right? And I just like, but that whole week your body is still cascading from inflammation and having to clean up the damage of one meal. Like, is that one meal really worth that? Okay, I'm getting off my gluten soapbox. So, so thank you. Is there anything else you want to say to kind of really have us fully grasp this, the necessity of 100% of the population removing barley, wheat, rye, and oats because of how damaging it is to everyone?
Honestly, Ashley, I think that's a stronger statement than I would make, even as a celiac. What I would say is there's so many layers to this. Okay, so back in like the 1940s, 1950s, there were food shortages, and gluten, wheat was it's not genetically modified, okay? But I don't really understand the difference, okay, between hybridization and genetic modification, because basically the end result is that they bred it so that it grows faster, it withstands drought, it withstands pests, and it doesn't fall over in heavy rains or wind. That's genetic modification in my world, but it's called hybridization. And
Well, one happens one happens in a lab, right? Where they're like, we're going to take the genes of a fish and we're going to put it into a tomato, right? Like
that's definite.
That's GMO, right? And or we're going to take this wheat and we're going to make it so it's resistant to, we're going to actually have it create Bt toxin so that the wheat itself kills bugs, or like some crazy nonsense where now you're like you're eating something that has the genes of something else, right?
Yes.
But breeding something, when wheat 100 years ago is not even recognizable to the wheat we have today, or even in the 40s. It had the amount of gluten is so much more. It's crazy.
Yes.
It used to just be like a handful of little kind of seeds on the end of a stalk, and now it's like 100 seeds right on the end of a stalk. It's just it's completely different, and they also increase the amount of gluten that's in wheat. But yes, you're right that over time these crops were bred, and now they've bred to produce so much more gluten that people are reacting to that, but don't react to like ancient grains.
Right. So that's one part of it. And then the next part of it is that, excuse me, as Americans, we often are eating it much more frequently. So we're not necessarily cooking breakfast and cooking lunch and cooking dinner. So faster food has become needed, and that faster food is typically gluten. So, so here you have the layer of where it's more allergenic. We're eating it more. We're eating more of it. You know, my God, I remember being a kid. I found a dress of my mom's my mom was born in 1944. And I remember finding, like, I think it was her wedding dress. It was kind of a, midi white dress. It was like a size 0. People are eating more. We are actually bigger than we were 50 years ago. We're physically bigger, so we eat more. And then the next layer of that is that you mentioned stomach acid. There's a really cool association between stomach acid and gluten sensitivity. So if you're someone who is, if you have the genes for gluten sensitivity or celiac, that you seem more likely to have low stomach acid. It's not clear which is the chicken and which is the egg and which came first, but there's some kind of association. Okay. So the next layer is our lives are much more chaotic. And so we aren't taking the time to slow down and eat properly, chew our food. So there's all these layers to it. We eat with stress, that suppresses our stomach acid. That makes us more likely to let bacteria and not break down our food properly into the next phase, which is the small intestine. So there's all these layers to it, Ashley, that just keep propagating. But I don't know that I would say everybody shouldn't eat gluten, period. What I would say is the best and healthiest way to eat is a way that has a minimum amount, if any, of processed food and food from a package. And if you start with that, that becomes sort of naturally a gluten-free diet, but it's not gluten-free for the purpose of gluten-free. It's gluten-free for the purpose of getting higher quality nutrients that do more for your body and sustain the mitochondria and the telomeres and your DNA and your vitality. That's the reason, not just to do gluten-free for the sake of it. It's because of how you feel it as a result.
Got it. The myotoxins you talked about. I've been excited to uncover that. Can we jump into that?
Definitely. Mycotoxins are nasty little boogers.
Yeah. So what are they and where do they come from and how do we avoid them?
Well, step into my office. So they are the most common sources are water damaged buildings. And when you say to someone, have you been in a water damaged building? Most people are like, I don't know, not that I know of. But then you drill into it and go, okay, did you go to school? In a school? And they go, yes. Okay, schools are typically moldy. Did you go to college and live in a dorm? Yes. Okay, dorms are typically moldy. Oh, okay. A lot of government buildings are typically moldy. Old homes are typically moldy. Homes that are built in wet climates are typically moldy. Homes that have water damage, like I live in Massachusetts, and we had the Snowmageddon winter in 2015, and 1,000,001 people had ice dams, which essentially opened up their roof to the outside world, and then they had water in their walls. So that kind of stuff's really hard to remediate. So if you get water in your walls, you got to fix it. So all of these layers, right? So that's the big exposure. I did randomly have a patient who had mold in her car. That's not the most common, but she said when I diagnosed her, she was like, I know my car's moldy. And she tested it and it was. So that's another possibility. And then there's food. There are a number of foods that are particularly moldy, including all grains. And that's because when you think about how grains are harvested, they cut them. Now, I'm not that familiar with honestly harvesting, but I know that they get cut, they get threshed, they get stored. And that storage process, they're often wet. So here's where you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. Because if you eat organic grains, they are not sprayed with glyphosate, which is a good thing. You don't want glyphosate in your body. It's terrible for you. Actually, just had a whole long call with Michael Antonio, who's this British researcher and has published some really landmark studies on glyphosate, because I'm giving a talk on glyphosate. And I was like, I really want to dig into this with him. And he was kind enough to do the data with me. And the ultimate upshot is that glyphosate was developed it was actually discovered as a chelating agent. And then in 2006, Monsanto patented it as a antibiotic. And how it works is to inhibit certain enzymes in bacteria and other microorganisms, and that inhibition throws off the function and lead to cell death. And it's going on around us. So if you're eating grains that are sprayed with glyphosate, you're getting glyphosate. So you don't want to do that. But if you're getting organic, the glyphosate helps dry out the crops. That's why it's helpful. But if you're getting non-organic grains that have not been sprayed, there is a chance they're moldy because they're sitting around waiting to be processed. And if it rained the day before they got processed, they're sitting around. So there's mold spores in the environment. Often for people, in Massachusetts, I always find my patients are flaring in April and September. And you're like, what's going on? It's the rainy season. In our rainy season, people flare. So in our neighborhood. So there's mycotoxins, when you get exposed to them, again, it comes down to genetics. If you're someone who's sensitive, and I've obviously got the genes because I'm really reactive to mold. And once it gets into your body, it just kind of hangs out. And if you're not a good detoxer, it just hangs out. Then if you layer on that you eat a standard American diet and don't get enough fiber to bind them, or don't do detoxing or stress the body, and then your body just stores it and hangs on to it because it's got no other option. It's kind of backed into a corner.
Can mold live inside our body, like in our bloodstream or our lymph system?
Ooh, that's a good question, Ashley. I normally think of the mycotoxins, which are the toxins the molds put out, as what's stored in our fat and our organs. But what you do bring up, Candida is a strain of mold. Candida is a yeast, and mold, they're related. So you can have Candida in the bloodstream. It's less common. You can have antibodies to Candida, which is very common. And you can have Candida in the gut. So you can have it in your body, but typically it's the mycotoxins, not necessarily the mold itself.
So if someone is having a mycotoxin, exposure, and I want to talk about how you'd figure that out, but let's say they're having exposure, you realize it's their office, let's say, and then they move offices to a place that is clean. Now the exposure is gone. So eventually the mycotoxins get cleared out, or are we now concerned that there's mold living inside them? Because I've heard from some people that, like, if they've had a certain amount of mold exposure, that mold is now like continuing to live inside them. But this is environmental mold, like not human, like internal mold. Like you're saying, Candida that lives inside you, it continually produces mycotoxins. So we've got to do a Candida detox and a replenishing of the gut in a good way, and rethink our diet for removing Candida. And so then that gets rid of the mycotoxins, because you're not addressing the mycotoxins, you're addressing the cause of them. Is that my understanding?
It's kind of both. So certainly you want to get out of the exposure. No question. It's sort of schizophrenic to try to heal from mold when you're continuing to be exposed. That doesn't make sense. Now, on the flip side, I will say, Ashley, I always say to people who have silver fillings, if you have mercury, let's start getting you detoxed and take your fillings out in the middle of the detox so that you're protected from any mercury that gets into your system, because we're already binding it, right? But mycotoxins, it's more like we want to get you out of the scenario where you're being exposed to mycotoxins. So you stop the madness, because it's just throwing off your body and jacking up your immune system. And it really throws people off. So you want to get them out of that scenario, whatever it is, and then start to remove the mycotoxins that they have stored in their body.
We haven't even plugged your book. And I'm at this point, like, as a listener, I'd be like, okay, I'm sold. How do I do this? how do I work with Wendie? How do I do this? Oh my gosh. I'm going to make sure that the links to everything is in the show notes of today's podcast at learntohealth.com, including the book Dirty Girl, Ditch the Toxins, Look Great, and Feel Freaking Amazing. I definitely want to talk more about your book, but I really want to understand the mycotoxins. So either it could be in our food, and I've seen this actually with coffee. I switched back when my husband and I were on coffee. We switched to mold-free, like certified mold-free coffee, and noticed a difference. I was like, what? Like, I really noticed a difference. I was like, that is crazy. And so it could be in our food, which freaks me out because I have like brown rice in bulk. I buy it in bulk. I'm just thinking, like, is this moldy? Like, how do we know? Is it just you can't see the mold?
It's typically the oats, the barley, the wheat, the rye. It's the grains. Rice is a funny one because it's sort of lumped in, but it's not so much rice.
Good.
It's more it's less. It's more the I think of grains.
Okay.
Not languaging it that well.
Okay, well, no, barley, wheat, rye, oats, that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
So we should look into foods that are more likely to contain mold, and coffee is a big one because of how they process coffee. So if you're a heavy coffee drinker, really get mold-free coffee. I know Bulletproof Coffee is one of those brands out there that prides themselves on being you don't have to put like MCT oil and butter or bacon fat or whatever they put in bulletproof drinks. You don't have to do that. You just you can buy the actual bag that says bulletproof and give that a try.
Purity is also, and there was a third one Purity. I just heard about that I'm blanking on, but there's another brand. I think if you do a Google search and it's like mold plus free plus beans, you should get it.
Yeah, there you go. So we want to make sure it's not in our food, make sure it's not in our home, on our car. And I did have we had a beautiful truck. We still miss it. But man, it was full of mold because an animal had chewed through the barrier and gotten into the cab, because the way they make the trucks now, they line it with the soy, like a soy lining. It's made from soy, so it's basically edible. So you're made an edible truck for the animals, and because we lived in a forest, we live in Washington, Western Washington, lots of animals, and an animal made its home, really cute little home inside the dashboard, and all of a sudden, we one day looked and we're like, why is there moisture inside the truck? And this is like newer truck. We opened the door and there was like 3 inches of fuzz. It looked like shag carpeting on every surface, especially the areas where the baby seat was, because that's like CSI where you shine the black light over like that. The mold was insane over by the baby seat. I'm like, well, that's where he threw up and that's where he spilt his his drink or whatever. But the whole thing was mold, and our insurance, God love Allstate, our insurance totaled the car and paid us for it, which it sucks because I'd rather have a truck than have a paid off truck, and have paid off not truck. But yeah, that was our experience with it. They were like, Allstate was like, this is unsafe to drive at this point because of all the mold.
Well, think about it. Hurricane Katrina in 2014,
yes.
All those, literally people were submerged up to the top of the first floor, which includes cars. And so if you had a car that was in any hurricane, but Hurricane Katrina, I have pictures of where you can't even see the cars because they're submerged. So if that's your car, that has mold. You should not be driving that car. Get rid of it.
Yes. And what if you bought a car? This is why Carfax is so important.
I
Because if you
know.
bought a car that's used, you don't know if it was in Katrina. Like you don't know, right? And I did a few interviews with Green Home Solutions. I don't know. Have you heard of them?
I have.
Sweet. So I recommend listeners go check those. I interviewed the head scientists and the CEO slash founder, whatever. They're amazing guys, but they created a enzyme that digests mold safely. So it doesn't allow for all the toxins to continue to be, the spores or whatever, to continue to be removed in the environment. And then they also test to make sure, and they'll come back and test for years to make sure that it's safe. But Green Home Solutions, that's my plug for them, because I was so impressed with their treatment. We had mold in our bathroom, and I was so impressed with it. And I loved interviewing them because I got so much information. But I can't believe how many people I've talked to, and there's friends, family, and also through the podcast and clients of mine. And mold is so common, is such a common problem, and it's so overlooked. So
Yeah.
once we remove ourselves from the mold, what is the most important thing we should do to help ourselves recover from that exposure?
See a functional medicine provider who's senior. I used to be like, see a functional medicine provider, but it's really see a senior functional medicine provider who's comfortable doing toxins testing. That's the criteria, right? And then test, and then target your treatment to get rid of those strains from you.
So how do we test? Are we testing for mycotoxins? Are we testing for mold? What
You're
does this
testing
look
for
like?
mycotoxins. You test your house for mold, and you test your body for mycotoxins.
Got it. And let's say we've removed the mold, or removed ourselves from mold, like we got rid of the car, or we moved offices or whatever. And we now know we're no longer in a mold environment. How long do we wait until we test for the mycotoxins? Because it isn't going to clear out of our system.
Yeah, I think this is a really nuanced question, Ashley. So
Okay.
if there are people who are not sensitive to mold. So it's so funny. As I said that, I thought, I'm not sure if the studies have been done to look at, because mold is implicated in degenerative diseases, dementia, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. It's really all of the toxins are pretty strongly implicated in those diseases. And so I'm thinking about, I don't know the answer to, so I'm completely hypothesizing here. Okay. This is the part where you're like, it's not data, I'm thinking.
Right.
So,
Or it's the stubborn husband that says, I'm fine, I don't feel anything.
right. So, but the thing about it is there are people who are not genetically susceptible to mycotoxins or mold. So what I honestly don't know is what percentage of people with dementia don't have mycotoxin genes. I don't know that. Okay. I don't know. So I'm just thinking about, if you are exposed to mold, yes, you want to get out of it. But if you're exposed to mold and you feel amazing, that's different than if you're exposed to mold and you feel terrible, right? So the behaviors are different. If you're someone who really is reactive to mold, you don't do well in moldy environments, you have a reaction, then I would say you're someone who wants to then test and treat. If you get out of the moldy environment and you feel amazing, I don't know that I would go down spend lots of time, energy, and money on functional medicine visits and testing, because maybe you don't need it. But the thing that I'll say is amazing, meaning vital, vibrant, healthy, able to and interested in intimacy, able to move your body, brain working well, not noticing any body system because it's functioning optimally. Your weight is optimal. Your cardiovascular and metabolic status is perfect. If that's you, cool, you don't have to do anything. But if that's not you, then I would recommend testing and targeting your treatment.
You answered my next question, which is one of the symptoms we should look for.
Oh,
And
there's
that was
even more.
awesome. Give us some more. Give us some more symptoms of mycotoxin
Sure.
exposure.
Sure. So hair loss, all things skin. Mycotoxins cause a lot of skin stuff. So rashes, acne, itchiness, just sort of being like, God, my skin's just really not right. Asthma, all respiratory disorders, weight issues, difficulty losing weight. I personally found that my gut got a lot more regulated when I started to deal with the mycotoxins. That the mycotoxins was the most impactful thing I did to quiet down my celiac canary in the coal mine stuff, because I started that first, actually. And
The
so gut
Sorry to
health.
interrupt, but I'm
Yeah.
thinking about what you said about hair loss and about skin and your story where you came home from Notre Dame. Were you also exposed to mold as well as lead? Like when the building burned, I imagine parts of the building were moldy. Did that expose you to mycotoxins?
I may have. I know the burning building didn't expose me to mycotoxins, but I mean, we stayed in the historical French region. Like, who knows, right? Like, I have no idea what I got exposed to, but
Got it.
it's very possible. But I already knew that I had a mycotoxins issue. But it was like the sum total of all of the exposures sent me over the edge, right? And the most pressing exposure that I got was a clear lead exposure. But I already, there's so much we haven't talked about, Ashley. I am a child of the 70s. I had pneumonia when I was 6 months old, which means I got antibiotics when I was a 6 month old. I
Mm.
had multiple ear infections and strep throat growing up. I mean, it was a sort of a path. I was a poster child for food sensitivities, but I didn't know it. And I have two genes for celiac. And then I had what occurred for me as very stressful events in childhood.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went to med school, and I couldn't simply do family practice. No, I had to do OBGYN because it was hard, and I got to stay up all night delivering babies. Sounds great until something goes wrong, right? And
Right.
we forgot about the part where I grew up in the 80s and microwaves came out, and we had those prepackaged meals in plastic, and we took
Mm.
advantage of them. So I have a whole bunch of fillings in my mouth. I should say. So when you really start to look at my toxin package, I was the whole package, man. I had everything. So, because by the time I got to that lead exposure, I had mercury, some existing lead, mycotoxins, environmental toxins, and that little bit of lead that I got from being in Notre Dame was the straw that broke my back. That was it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
So
the
you
context.
you were just waiting. Your body was just waiting to
Yeah.
have that one additional stressor. And for some people, it's not a physical stressor like
Yeah.
leads. For some people, it's an emotional event.
Yeah. Or
For some people,
perimenopause. Hormone
right.
hormone changes could absolutely be a stressor.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right, an emotional event is hugely stressful. It's a life change. Something happens, a breakup, a death, a traumatic loss, an ending a friendship, whatever that is, a terrible boss who just keeps chipping away at your self-esteem. These are all massive stressors and can have a tremendous effect on our body's ability to detox. And I'd be happy to dive into that one because that's a great conversation.
Oh. Yeah, because I've had stories with people where it's like I don't know what happened, but I had this emotional event and my health was never the same. Their memory was like their health was so much better before, but you're saying that they could have been just on the precipice, right? They could have just been slightly over toxic or just had a little bit too much of the lead or just had a little bit of candida, sort of had this everything was just sort of on that edge and maybe they woke up tired 3 times a week instead of all every day,
Right.
right?
Right.
And so they were just on the edge, and then they had an event. And for some women, it's pregnancy because that's emotionally stressful, that's physically stressful, and then there's the possibly 4 or 5 years of breastfeeding. I know a mom that went up to 7 years of breastfeeding. Mostly people do 2 or 3 years, but if you have several kids in a row, like you, could be 11 years of breastfeeding. So that's the broken up sleep. And then we just say, oh, we blame it on, it's just because I'm not sleeping. It's just because,
Right.
and we negate. We don't listen to our body and we negate because we go, oh, it's just because I didn't have sleep or I didn't eat well or I'm running around chasing the kids or I'm stressed out because of the kids. And we don't take the time to go, wait a second, I never recovered from that pregnancy. I never
Yeah.
recovered from that. And
Yeah.
that could have been that we were at that breaking point and just even the emotional stress was enough. So yeah, let's talk about how just something that's so intangible as emotional or mental stress could have a physiological effect on setting us over the edge, especially when it comes to detox.
I love talking about this. So it's pretty cool. The body does not distinguish between types of stress. So the body doesn't have a bucket for my damn boss or the darn Massachusetts drivers. That's not another bucket, or the bucket of my spouse is irking me, or my kids are driving me crazy. None of those are separate buckets in the body. Whatever you say to me, I'm going to say to you, it's all going into the stress bucket. Okay. So your adrenals are these tiny little organs that sit on top of your kidneys, and they're magical. They literally determine whether you live or die. And they're these tiny little things. So, important things come in small packages. So they sit here and they're responsible for a number of behaviors. And when you go really 10,000 feet, big picture, the primary goal of your adrenals is fight, flight, freeze, and maintaining your blood pressure. So that's your life or death pathway. And your adrenals are going to do that at any cost. And then your nice to have pathway is your hormone balance, which becomes particularly important when especially if you're women, when you start to transition into menopause and the ovaries no longer do the job of making the estrogen, your adrenals pick it up. Okay? But if you have any stress in that bucket, your adrenals interpret it in a particular way. So for example, well, no, let me keep going on this. So I call it the Trinity. I apparently like things of three, but that's just how it's been presented. So there's your adrenals. When your adrenals experience that they are being stressed or something stressful is occurring to your body, and that could be anything, you interpret it, excuse me, at a cellular level, like a lion is going to eat you. That's how primitive we are. And when a lion is about to eat you, it is not important to digest your food, have sex, ovulate, uptake your nutrients, detox. None of that stuff happens. It's not important because what is happening, your body experiences an existential crisis. Like, I'm going to die. We need to focus here. And what happens is a really cool cascade. So the adrenals signal to the liver, don't do detox, because what we really need to do is focus on getting sugar to the muscles. So your liver, so two things happen at that point. Your liver takes the sugar that it stores, called glycogen, out of the liver and makes it into glucose. So you have glucose in the bloodstream. And simultaneously, your body will signal you, I really need some quick sugar. So you're going to start craving carbs usually. Carbs and candy are typically what people are like, I'm craving. And I'm like, well, right, you're stressed. So your body is telling you.
Yes, just think about our society. You have a breakup, you go for ice cream. You have a stressful moment, you go for the chocolate bar. Like, how many times is that reinforced that we go for sugar in times of stress?
Yeah. At least the ice cream has some fat, hopefully. But yeah. So you crave sugar and you take sugar out of your liver. Now, simultaneously, what's happening in your gut, and that sugar goes to your muscles in your legs, by the way, so you can run, because ultimately your body is primed to run from a lion. Okay. We haven't kept up with the technology. Our bodies haven't evolved at the same pace that technology has. So then in your gut, your adrenals signal the gut, right now, digestion and absorption is not a priority. Stop. So if you're just had a big meal that made its way into your intestines, it sits there and it rots. And then the bacteria that are anaerobic, that are there to digest you when you die, they're psyched because they're like, ooh, a meal. And they get going. And those are the bacteria that make you bloat and gassy and gross, like feel disgusting, because those are dysbiotic bacteria. Okay. And the other part of it is when you eat that sugar, candida in your system, it's common to have candida. And I would say even a small amount is normal, but if you have a large amount, it starts to run the show. And when you eat sugar, it gets fed, and then it needs to eat more because it just reproduced, so it makes you crave more. So now you're on the rat wheel of, oh, geez, I've just increased my candida in the system along with my stress. So all these things are going on simultaneously, right? And in the adrenals, you start to use up the raw materials that you have to make cortisol. You start to use them up because, you're constantly churning. Now, this is what happens in the short term. In the long term, your body starts to go into long-term crisis management because it's like, wait a minute, obviously we're not running. And instead of starting to sort of increase your metabolism and burn and put sugar where it belongs, you start to actually collect your calories and depose fat. And usually that fat is called angry fat, and it's full of interleukins and inflammatory mediators that are sitting right in your gut. So people are like, oh, I gained all this weight right in my midsection. I'm like, yep, that's your stress gut. And so this is what starts to happen long term is you put that, you hold on to every calorie, the metabolism starts to slow, and you go down the inflammation pathway because you've deposited all of this fat around your intestines. You can get fatty liver because you're now in a dysfunctional pattern. It's pretty creepy, actually.
So you're saying that the fat around the midsection is so like pear-shaped people, or like Bart Simpson gut, or does it look like you're pregnant? Like that shape where it's just a bunch of fat deposited right there. That is more likely than not stress gut, deposits of angry fat from long-term being in fight or flight mode.
Yes, and I feel like I'm on improv. Yes, and because when you've shut down detox, your liver's no longer doing the job. What's happening is, we're exposed to thousands of chemicals every day. Humans have created over 140,000 unique chemicals, and we create an additional unique 1,500 chemicals every year. So as we move through our day, we're exposed to thousands of chemicals, and it's like death by 1,000 cuts because obviously none of them are in amounts that are going to kill us, but they are in amounts that are high enough to torture us. And so what's happening is, instead of your liver working on those, and by the way, alcohol is a toxin, and it's an acute toxin. So if you get exposed to alcohol, you're going to process that because it'll kill you directly. So you start to store these toxins in your fat. And so if you're having trouble losing weight and your thyroid is normal, where I go is toxins. Because that's the next, it's been about 4 years and I've been in this dance, and it's like everything kind of comes down to toxins and food and inflammation.
Toxins, food, and inflammation. Seriously.
In a nutshell, there's your health.
So when you talked about the trifecta, were you saying adrenals, liver, gut?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Got it.
On top of the trifecta of leaky gut, trigger, and genetics / epigenetics. That's another trifecta. I really like the word trifecta much better than Trinity because I always feel like it's a religious reference, and it's not. It's definitely
Trinity
not.
sounds like such a positive thing. Be like, the Trinity that's killing you. Like,
right? The trifecta. It's really it's the perfect storm and the trifecta of. Yeah, I love that language. That's great. I'm going to steal that blindly.
You should do that. It's yours now. Put a bow on it. So to wrap that up, it's very important to do the emotional work and the emotional healing and check in with yourself. And it's as important to make sure you're regulating your emotional stress and mental stress as it is your physical stress and your environmental stressors. They're all equally important because your body cannot distinguish between your emotional stress and the burger you ate through the drive-through, or the plastics you're exposed to, or the lead you're exposed to. Like stress is stress. But more importantly, when our body feels like it is under threat, right? So when you feel anxiety is a message from it's like the red warning light on the dashboard saying, hey, we're under attack, we're under attack, and we can be totally safe. But if we're imagining something, even just sitting there, because the body's always listening to our thoughts, even if we're just sitting there imagining something we don't want to have happen, is enough to trigger the stress response. So we have to be really careful, clear. We have to be very clear and intentional with our thoughts, and do the emotional work, the emotional healing. I've got great interviews on that, but that is as important as the other stuff, because if we trigger the fight or flight response, we go into that cascade, like you said, and long term, that our body, we're fermenting or rotting food in our stomach, we're feeding bad bacteria, we're getting more mycotoxins in our body. Like, that's
Ew.
horrible. That's all from just being careless with our thoughts and allowing let's say the mainstream media, right? Like, I don't know, go somewhere where there's cable TV and watch it. Not in my house, but go somewhere where there's cable TV and just turn to any news channel, watch it for 5 minutes, and you're going to be rotting your food instead of digesting and absorbing your food, right? And then your body's going to, like you said, in the long term, cause you to gain weight in the midsection, and that weight is also carrying with it a lot of toxins, right? So we need to reverse that. Let's, turn around, make a U-turn, go back, and let's go back to where we're every day taking time to check in with ourselves emotionally, mentally, spiritually, physically, and really being responsible for our state of stress and our state of triggering the autonomic nervous system parasympathetic response of rest and digest. If it takes going for that walk, 5 minutes 3 times a day, just getting out there and breaking up your day, doing deep breathing, doing 5 minutes of meditation, doing a few breaths and chewing your food slowly, and making sure you sit before you eat, and you eat in a calm state, so all these little things add up hugely. And that's been my journey as well. So I've seen this with so many of my clients, like just making sure we're taking ourselves out of the stress response. So I love that you associate that, and you showed us, it's like you see those crime shows where they show you the board, and there's a bunch of like these pins and strings on the board.
Yes.
You're
Welcome
like that.
to my
You're
pin
like this.
brain.
So you're like the crazy detective that no one was listening to until they finally realized that your crazy conspiracy board was actually true. And you're like, look, you're stressed out because of your job, and that's actually causing you to gain weight, and also it's causing your candida, which is causing your brain fog, and they're all connected.
Yes,
So
totally.
so you've got the great way of putting it all together and allowing us to really see it. So thank you for the pin board. That's wonderful. So we want to make sure that we're checking off all these boxes as we go through. You wanted to talk about epigenetics, and I love this conversation because so many people are told by their well-intentioned doctors who are not trained in functional medicine or holistic medicine. There's like, oh, well, you have diabetes because it's genetic. Take this pill for the rest of your life. Goodbye. And it's like, well, wait a second. That's totally not the case. Epigenetics is this a beautiful dance where the body can express in certain ways, and due to nutrients or due to toxins can express in a different way. So I'd love for you to enlighten us why it's so important for us to understand our epigenetic tendencies and how we can utilize them to best detox and gain our health back.
I'm going to use myself as an example because it's such a clear example, honestly. So epigenetics is this, think of it like a small supporting cast of genetics that supports your DNA. And depending on what happens in your life, your parents' life, your grandparents' life, okay? So we go back pretty far. Whatever happens in those three, I guess you think of it the other way, whatever happens in your grandparents' life and your parents' life and then your life influence whether your genes are going to turn on or not turn on. Are you with me so far?
Yeah.
Because this is like epigenetics is insane. It's really cool. So when I said I would share about myself is I essentially come from like a line of celiacs because my dad has celiac and I have celiac and my two brothers They're half brothers genetically to me. My two half brothers genetically, who I consider emotionally my full brothers, but really genetically they're my half brothers, they have celiac. And then when you go up the line, my grandmother died of dementia, which is strongly implicated in celiac and gluten sensitivity. And then my uncle, I'm pretty sure he's got celiac, but he won't get tested. And then his three kids, of the three, two of them are sensitive to gluten, and one of them has ADHD, which is implicated in gluten sensitivity. Okay, so, and by the way, of my four kids, two of them are really sensitive to gluten. We figured out that I have two copies of the celiac gene as a dubious genetic overachiever. I've got two copies for celiac, two copies for MTHFR, and two copies for vitamin D deficiency. So by default, right? At that point, I stopped counting. I was like, I'm not looking at anything else. So by default, I passed that along to all my kids, and we allowed my older two to have gluten at preschool. And by the time they were done with preschool, they were both sensitive to gluten. So by the time we have this like second generation of kids, we call them the bigs and the littles. The bigs were sensitive, and the littles, we were like, no, you're not getting any gluten because we have epigenetically enhanced nasty genes for celiac. And now let me talk to you about some things. So my dad was like pretty sick in his 20s, and this is before he had me. And his dad was very sick his whole life and was an immigrant. On the other side of the family, I'm sorry, my grandmother, she wasn't an immigrant, but her parents were both immigrants. And they lived a pretty successful life, but they always lived in fear. Okay? And then on the other side of my family, my grandmother was an immigrant. My grandfather was an immigrant. And so my mom was the first generation born in the country. And so those stressors acted to turn on those genes, okay? And so when you then layer on, this is why it becomes a blended soup. When you then layer on, yes, I ate sloppy joes as a kid, and then I had the microwave food and all the antibiotics that messed with my gut permeability and my microbiome. By the time you get to med school, when I'm super stressed and eating on the run and eating a lot of gluten, my ability to fight this off has really been diminished and deteriorated. And so epigenetics is what turns on or off these genes. And sometimes they occur before you were even born. So you're at the effect of other people's choices, which kind of stinks. But the good news is you're only 15%, right? If I had lived a life of not eating gluten, or if I had lived a life of not honestly abusing myself in terms of putting myself in stressful situations, I may not be where I was and am now in terms of being so sensitive to gluten, right? Knowing now what I didn't know then, but I didn't know those things. Can I share a really cool study?
Yes.
I want to share a really cool study. I heard about it on NPR. I was driving from Western Mass to Eastern Mass where I live, and I had my kids in the car, and for once they were quiet. I was like, shh, we got to listen to this. So it was this really cool study of this tiny town in Sweden. I'm pretty sure it's Sweden. They keep meticulous records on their inhabitants of their town. And their records went back to like the 17 or 1800s. It was a couple hundred years. Wow. And these two epidemiologists went there. I don't know why they did this, but they went there and they started just combing through the records of this town. And here's what they found that was so creepy and yet such a huge thing for us to be able to make choices about our health. That what they found was that if your grandparent, when they were going through puberty, experienced a feast, meaning they had a good crop, they had lots of food, they ate a lot, then their offspring 2 generations down, this is the impact of epigenetics, that their offspring 2 generations down were significantly more likely to have diabetes and heart disease, and on average died 6 years earlier than the general population. And if your grandparent went through a famine when they hit puberty, their offspring 2 generations down were significantly less likely to experience diabetes and cardiovascular disease, and on average lived 25 years more than the general population. So there's a spread of 30 years based on what happened to your grandparent when they went through puberty.
Can you explain why? Can you explain
Crazy.
like I'm trying to wrap my brain around that. Is that because they were fasting and that has protective properties, or I would imagine a famine would cause stress on the body. But why did that actually work to their favor?
I have no idea. Honestly, this is what's being studied now. So it's just really some of the reasons. How do I say this? It's easy to feel victimized, right? Because we can't do anything about it. It's
Mm,
done. It happened. The stuff that happened to my grandparents and my dad is 75 years to 150 years old.
mm-hmm.
And so we don't have any control over that. But your genetics, again, are 10 to 15% of the total mix. And we do have control over the 85 to 90% of it, meaning
Yeah.
you have control over your eating, your sleeping, your pooping, your relationships, your intimacy, your thoughts, your how much you exercise. You have control over all of that. And so that's where it gets inspiring because you're not your genetics. Yes, they put you at
Mm-hmm.
risk and it's helpful to know what you're at risk for, but you are not your genetics.
That really makes me wonder if the protective properties of fasting went into play, and if
Mm-hmm.
so, then it could have then if you fasted, you could be like, not if you chose, let's say do a 5 day fast every quarter, or three to 5 day fast, or 3 day fast once a month, or something like that. Like there's we see that there's long term when someone fasts, there's for months and months and months, they actually see the benefits of those fasts when they continue to do blood work and check up on the person. So there's protective properties that happen when we fast, and I'm just wondering if it then would, now we're seeing evidence that it's actually goes down a few generations, which boggles my mind.
It's
Um,
amazing.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So amazing. Because we also see on the other side of that, people who, like, for example, were in the Holocaust, or, very, very traumatic experiences during the war, that they're able to see higher levels just of sort of ambient natural stress, like higher levels of natural stress hormones in even the grandchildren of Holocaust survivors. And they've talked about how, people who like had normal sort of healthy, like normal stress lives versus incredibly stressful lives, that even two generations there, it's seen in their genetic makeup, which means it's even more important if your grandparents, your parents or grandparents went through really, 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 really hard times. It's even more important for you
Yeah.
to take it seriously, to check yourself, to lower your stress levels, right? It's even more important to get Wendie's book and detox the stress levels, and focus on, ditching those toxins. Dirty girl, ditch the toxins. I'm excited for your book, because I the way you teach is, you hand over this information in such an easy visual way, right? And
Thank
that's
you.
what I love. I want the science. I want you to tell us the science, but I also want people to really understand it and be able to use it.
Right.
Everyone wants to walk away from this interview going, okay, now I know how to tackle those 15 pounds on my stomach that I can never get rid of no matter what I do. Now I know, and now I get to look into my stress levels, my mycotoxins, my all this stuff, right? The go down the checklist.
Yeah, I mean, look, so reading, I wrote it with my husband. I co-wrote it. Reading the book is like talking to me, basically, and it's meant to be a roadmap, right? Because if you think about how many toxins we're exposed to, it is paralyzing. And so I am not ever going to tell you you're going to be toxin free. What I'm going to tell you is that you want to get your body burden of toxins down enough that it's not messing you up. So you can live a vital, vibrant, healthy life, able to be interested in intimacy till you're at least 100. That you get
Mm-hmm.
better every decade. That is my philosophy, and I will go to the mat fighting for that one because that's my why. And something you said earlier, I was like, we have to talk about the why. you have to know why you're doing this, right? It's not because you have an event coming up and you want to look good for it. Nope. It's because you want to be healthy enough to see your great grandchildren and play with them and have them remember you in 50 years, right? Or that you make a legacy impact that is felt by millions. That's really, you got to find some why that's massive. Because if it's like, I want to look better for the wedding I'm going into September, after September, you have nothing, no more future that pulls you forward that's powerful enough. So you want to pick a big, scary goal that you can't accomplish in your lifetime, but that gives you strength when you're like, oh, I really wish I could eat that. I really feel left out. I always used to eat that at Thanksgiving, right? There's a lot of emotion around food. So when you start to feel that emotion to get something bigger, like, yeah, I did always used to do that. And remember how I felt. And here's what I want to do with this newfound health.
You know what really helps me? I've cut out a lot of foods I used to eat, and I imagine how it's going to make me feel. And I go, I don't want to feel that way tomorrow. And then I can imagine what it's doing to the tiny, very less than paper thin lining of my gut, and how, eating, for example, fried food is a bunch of free radicals. That's like punching holes like bullets through the nucleus of my cells and causing all kinds of havoc, just inflammation and havoc and craziness. And then the fried oil in the food is suffocating the good bacteria in my gut and creating an anaerobic environment for all the bad stuff to take over. Because there's this war. I mean, there's this real war going on in your gut all the time. And it's the good versus the evil, right? They should make a movie. There's a war. There's 6 pounds of bacteria in your gut. It's like there's a chihuahua or like baby kangaroo, like living in your gut. And there's a war between like 2 or 3 pounds of bad bacteria and 2 or 3 pounds of good bacteria. And they're going at it. And, hopefully you have less than 2 or 3 pounds of bad bacteria, but for the people who are sick. And so every single meal and every single decision could be, is it going to tip the scales for the bad guys or the good guys? Right. And then there's the bad stuff in your gut that's making the mycotoxins, and you eat a little bit of gluten, and now those mycotoxins are sucked up into your body and affecting your brain. Did mycotoxins cross the blood-brain barrier?
Ooh, I don't know the answer to that. I know that when you have a patient with dementia and get rid of their mycotoxins, it improves brain function. So I have to say yes, but I don't know for sure. Speculation.
Both my grandfathers died of dementia. I mean, you can't really, figure out their Alzheimer's until after, right? So they just called it dementia. And I was really young. This was in the 80s when they died. And when you said that, likely people who pass away of dementia, there's a relationship between that and barley, wheat, rye, and oats, right? So likely, right? So that's another thing, is if you know of direct relatives that pass away of dementia or have dementia, that you yourself and people related to them would benefit from, or could benefit from, cutting out those grains, right? To prevent it. Because it's our genetics aren't a death sentence, which is what you said, right? They're not a death sentence. If everyone in your family died of heart disease, it doesn't mean you have to as well. It means that that's the thing you need to be, that's the thing to circle on the chalkboard for you. I need to live a life preventing this, and I need to live a life creating heart health, focusing on heart health. Don't focus on dying of heart disease. Focus on everything you can do. You wake up in the morning, your feet hit the ground, you go, good, what am I going to do to create heart health today? I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to drink my water. I'm going to do my meditation or my prayer. I'm going to eat bowls and bowls of steamed greens and beets and a little bit of balsamic vinegar for the nitric oxide. So you build up this list in your mind of all these wonderful things that, and if you follow this daily habit of I'm going to create this health for me, then that 15% genetic factor isn't going to do you under, right? Because we have to live a life of these actionable steps. And your book has a bunch of actionable steps. Can you
Yes.
give us now, I mean, you've taught us so much, but can you give us some homework, some tidbits from your book so that we can, tantalize us with the tidbits from your book? Of course, we're all going to run out and buy it afterwards and start following it diligently. But set us up right now. What can we do right now, starting today, to improve our health?
I love this question. I really encourage people to always start with food because you do it 2 to 3 times a day at least. And it's the cornerstone of what we do. So if you have to take stock of where you are and get real. So if you're someone who's eating a relatively standard American diet, meaning something processed for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, then action item number 1 is to pick a meal and get rid of the processed food at that meal. Once you've won, go on to the next meal. And once you've won at both of those meals, get the third meal so that the food you're eating generally is devoid of processed food. Yes, you can have special occasions. Yes, you can have a treat. And what you just want to watch out for is that it's not a slippery slope. Meaning, you have it once in a while, but then you start having it every day and then you're like, oops, sorry. So it's important to start with food, and that's actionable, right? And no matter where you live, and I'm cognizant that not everyone has the same financial resources. So ideally in a world where you have all choice, you would go for no processed and organic. And then do your best, right? You can get frozen foods that are organic, that are often much cheaper than fresh, and those are pretty good. So if it's a choice between something that has pesticides versus something that's frozen that has no pesticides, I would go for the frozen, especially because it's flash frozen, so it preserves a lot of the nutrients in it. And don't cook it to death, right? Because then you've gotten rid of all the nutrients. So lightly cook it. And when you've handled, it's so funny in our book, what we go through is like, if this is where you're starting for food, do this. And if this is where you're starting, do this. Because we recognize you could be on a huge spectrum of places for food. So we start with figure out where you are and then start to level up. Now, I always say to people, most of the people, well, actually all the people who see me are female because I'm a gynecologist, so I only see females. But my husband partner sees men also. And I always say to my patients, watch your language. Language is really critical. And so this isn't a diet. A, it's a lifestyle. And B, there's no cheating on your lifestyle. There's just what you do and whether it does or doesn't work for you. Because, they call me. We have these calls and it's like, bless me, Dr. T. I have sinned. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm not the confessional booth. You have not sinned. You are perfect and complete. And sometimes you do things that don't work for you. Move on, But then the question is, let's Monday morning quarterback this. Did you eat that at that party because you were A, hungry, B, forgot to prepare, C, left out, D, acting out? What was the source of it? Let's get down to the source of it so next time you can have a win. When you go to the party that you, at the end of it, say, oh, I actually ate in a way that I feel good the next day. Right? So we really look at a lot of that in our book, which is how do you, are you sleeping? Are you moving your body? What's your genetic risk? All of that, all the stuff we've talked about today are things that we talk about in our book and really drill into. It's like one per chapter. We get a whole chapter on each of these things.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah. And
I
you
love
may
it.
want to cut this out. This is a part that if you want to cut it out, I'm totally fine with. But my experiences as a perimenopausal woman led me to say to my husband, we need to write a book about how to navigate perimenopause in a way that's empowering. And so that book we're starting tomorrow, actually. And that will be out in
Congratulations. I
2023.
am not cutting this out. That is a fantastic thing. And I can't wait to have you back
Thank
to talk
you.
about this. I have a girlfriend of mine and she's a listener. So it's so funny when like I'm like my legit like friends in real life then became my fans of my show and they're like, I heard that episode. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is cool. But kind of crazy. And so we've known each other for years and she started becoming a listener and then she started using, and I'm not preachy to my friends. I mean, I can't help myself. So 5 minutes into any conversation, I'm like, oh, I did an interview with this doctor. I mean, and then I catch myself because I'm like, I'm sorry, guys. I know I'm like this, like I act like this, like Lisa Simpson about health stuff, but it's kind of my thing. I truly do geek out all the time, 24/7. This is who I am. And so a friend of mine didn't tell me she had these health issues. She's had 7 kids. 7 kids. She's lived in she knows at least 2 languages that I know, lived in several countries, and just really had this very eclectic life, at times incredibly stressful, really beautiful life. They do ministry where they've actually not allowed, but they open their home to people who are recovering drug and alcohol addicts. They're sober, but they're going through their program, and they open their home with their children, open their home, and they bring them in because now this is a clean and healthy and sober environment
Right.
with, and so they, for many years, have ministered to these people who are amazing. Like, it's so hard to recover from like fentanyl addiction, right? Like
Yep.
these crazy street drug addictions. And this is like just their kind of like their side gig, is they are constantly helping these people to get back on their feet, and they're called to do that. And then they also run a construction business. So it's just like one thing or another. And she
Wow.
said to me, oh, I listened to this episode. Now I don't have migraines anymore because I did what this top doctor told me to do. Like, that's like a major life thing. And then I did this, and she's done several things from several different guests. But what she told me, which I can't wait for her to hear this episode. So she's listening. Hello.
Shout out. Shout out. Right?
Shout out. Yeah. She said to me something really interesting, because she's like really, really healthy. She looks really healthy. And she goes, I hit a total wall, and out of nowhere, she's in her 40s, out of nowhere, her estrogen drops down to the floor, like out of nowhere. And when you said, and I've heard people kind of talk about it, but you say things like several times in this interview, you said things, it's like I've heard it, but it never landed. And you had these tidbits really land in my listening, and I'm hoping for all the listeners too. I bet it has. And so for her, I think because she's in that moment where you said, if your adrenals are taxed, which I bet hers are, because she's lived such an amazing life and a very just beautiful, brilliant life so far. Her adrenals are taxed, and then her ovaries were like, well, guess what? We're clocking out. It's adrenals time. Perimenopause. Welcome to the beginning of menopause. And so now she's like, boom, hits the wall, completely slides all the way down to the floor. And so I can't wait for her to read your book also, because
Yeah.
I bet that's going to really, really help her. So
Late spring 2023. It's coming.
Oh, awesome. Well, you're welcome back on the show. Can't wait to have you back. I had shared earlier that I had that distended liver, tasting heavy
Yeah.
metals. Like, I was crazy. And I had switched over to a very healthy, very clean, totally no processed diet in an attempt to heal. Because I was actually doing keto and meat and everything that's what made it all come flaring out. That's what made it all, and
it's
it
too
was
much.
it was keto with a doctor, where we were following, and every week working with this doctor. And it was so bad, within like 3 months of keto with this doctor, my liver was crazy. I was going for all these tests, that my liver enzymes were through the roof. They were very concerned. They wanted to do biopsy, and I'm like, no. And then I did an interview that totally turned me around and had me do 100% unprocessed, whole food, plant-based, very healing, like a lot of raw foods also. And then I got because one of my doctors said, you really need to sweat, because that is one of your emunctory systems. That's one of your detox systems that allows you to bypass the liver. So I looked around, talked to a bunch of doctors, and finally settled on Sunlighten sauna, because the no toxins. Have you heard of the Sunlighten?
I have one.
You have one.
I love it.
So I have the 3-in-1, which it says it's about the size of a small closet, right? It fits. I'm actually sitting right beside it right now. That's my Sunlighten, and it's in the office, in the corner of the office. And my husband and I can actually fit in it, even though it's a one person. We can both fit in it on the bench. Although it's, you know what? It's not as fun as it sounds to be sitting with your husband sweating. You know, that's
Oh,
like, that
you
was fun for
know.
the first few times, but I like to just spread out a little bit and have my space. So we go back to back. But my what I thought was really interesting is my electricity bill didn't go up. Well, we turned off the heat because it's, the summertime, and I just checked the electricity bill because I'm like, wow, we've been really using the sauna a lot, and it didn't change. So it was like, it's about as much as having the heat on, and which we didn't have the heat on much because we're in a very neutral area. Seattle, we hardly ever had the heat on. But with the detox, I started with the sauna, and I noticed that it's everything slowly got better. My liver went down within a few weeks. My liver went down. I stopped tasting heavy metals. I was
Mm-hmm.
sweating almost every day in the sauna. I would sweat every day, but if I didn't really stay on top of my hydration, then I wouldn't do it that day. So I had to, that was it's my reward at the end of the day for being hydrated all day long.
Ha.
And that was about 4 years ago. Was it 4 years ago? It's like time is sort of crazy, right? Maybe five. It was 2018, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened was, I was the first time in my life I successfully lost weight and kept it off. It was 80 pounds. And that
Wow.
was over the course of 2 years. But you're right. The weight didn't just start coming off right away. It was gradual, and it was definitely after the first few months. Like, it was no, like, a little bit at first, because was like, that was inflammation. But using the sunlight and consistently was one of my best tools for detox. And then I was introduced to other stuff as well, and I'm never going to say that it's just one thing, but that's been
No, it's never
my
just one thing.
right. It's never just one thing, but that's why getting your book is so important. Because what if it's the 10 things or 12 things, and maybe we're doing three of them, and we need to add the rest. So that's why your book is so important, because it's going to let us know about all the stuff we're not doing, that we could be doing, to take ourselves to the next level. So here I am. I've come so far, but I know there's more for me to do. And that's why I'm excited for your book, and I'm excited for all your books, all the books that are going to come out in the future. But this one, thank you for writing it. I really appreciate that you came here today to share this, and I just know that you're helping so many people, so many women, but I think that this message can help men as well, just like you wrote it with your husband, and you're addressing everyone. So thank you, and thank you for the future generations, because imagine the
Mm.
parents, or let's say people who are listening who aren't parents yet, make these changes, and that is a trickle effect down generation after generation. So when you get up in the morning, I just want you to think about all the generations that you're touching, based because you're spreading this information. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's really a privilege. I think I love how you put that, that it's just not only for you, it's for future generations.
Yeah.
That's where the magic lives.
And even let that be the motivator for not eating that thing at the party, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
because as moms, and I know some dads are like super into being dads also. I'm not, but I can only say from my experience as a woman, right? Because that's who I am. As a mom, I mean, in the moment, I want to eat that whatever, that blank, that's going to be tasting really good in the moment. But if I were to think to myself that this is going to harm future generations of my unborn generations, like my grandchildren, or if I had that idea in my mind that I'm not just hurting, and even if I'm done having kids, my health impacts my children. My mom died when I was 22,
Mm.
and she was 55, and she was the epitome of health to me until she died. She was absolutely, I mean, so that was devastating to my life. And what if I die young, and how that impacts my son, right? And these
Right.
are lifestyle choices that we can make. They're little tiny ones that add up every day. And that is the difference between being around for your grandkids or not. And
Yeah.
that's you're every listener, you are important. Your life matters, and the impact you have on your family and your future generations matter. So you're worth it to say no in the moment to those temptations, for the long-term benefit of future generations. They get to be with you. And I think that's really beautiful. And so we just have to remember that our life choices, in every life choice we make, does have even a small impact on those we care about.
Yes. Small changes add up to huge impact over the course of a year.
Yeah,
It's really impactful.
absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Please,
My
please
pleasure.
come back when you have your sexy book written.
It's going to be a fun one. Once we embargo the title, I'll share it with you. It's. I mean, the first one's Dirty Girl. You can kind of imagine what the second one might. I mean,
Yeah,
well, you probably can't
it's
imagine
gonna
the
be
title, but it's certainly not going to be tame and boring. We'll put it
okay.
that
Good,
way.
good. Yeah. Well, I mean, we're talking about sex and health, right? So we need to make this fun, right?
We should. And not just fun, but accessible. Like, you know what? We can do this. We've got
Mm,
this. We've got the tools. And no, it's not normal to experience these things. It's fixable.
mm.
It's
I
fixable.
love that. I love that. Thank you so much, Dr. Wendie Trubow. This has been such a pleasure having you on the show. And I want to make sure that listeners also know that your website now, I have 5journeys.com. Is that the best website for you, or is there another website you want them to know about?
Well, I'm into world domination. So that's our clinic is fivejourneys.com. The book is on Amazon. That's the best place because you'll get it for the least
Mm-hmm.
price. We have my Instagram at Wendie Trubow MD. And we have our own
Okay.
podcast, which is the Five Journeys podcast, Live Like You Matter.
Nice. Yeah, definitely check out that podcast.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Have yourself a fantastic day, and I can't wait for you to come back on the show.
Me too. Thank you so much, Ashley. This has been great.
I hope you enjoyed today's interview with Dr. Wendie Trubow. She was amazing, wasn't she? And you know what? Right after I recorded this, I realized there was two more studies I didn't tell you about that I'm really excited about when it comes to utilizing light and heat therapy found in the sunlight and sauna system, which offers the full spectrum, the near, mid, and far infrared. There's two really incredible things, and that's increasing nitric oxide in the body and also the heat shock protein. So the sunlightened system, when you use it on a daily basis, it increases cardiovascular health and decreases high blood pressure. Actually, there was a study I just read recently that it increases nitric oxide. And if you've been a avid listener, you know we've talked about nitric oxide in the past because it's directly related to preventing cardiovascular events, preventing like heart attacks and supporting longevity and the health of the cardiovascular system. So we want to have a healthy level of nitric oxide in the body. Now, there's something called heat shock protein, and we talk about this in episode 410. That's really important because Marcus Friedemann in episode 410 talks about the natural treatments for cancer that some countries are freely using in hospitals for whatever reason. We get into it in that episode, but for whatever reason, are not being used in this country, but have been highly, highly studied in other countries. So the use of heat therapy stimulates heat shock protein. And there are some types of cancers that are unable to survive in the higher heat. And so they find that when you stimulate heat shock protein, they're also seeing that some cancers can't survive in that. And that's why we have, there's certain countries that are using heat therapy as an adjunct with other cancer treatments very successfully. So episode 410 is really good to listen to about that. But that's what I love about the Sunlighten system is that it helps your body to increase the heat shock protein, which heat shock protein, and there's tons of studies on it, it helps the body maintain homeostasis by forming new proteins, reactivating misfolded proteins, and it works as a chaperone to stabilize unfolded proteins and deform cells, which helps the body to prevent type 2 diabetes, obesity, arteriosclerosis, and of course, cancer, because we've seen that some cancers are DNA gone awry in some cases. But there's many other diseases that we see where DNA has gone awry through oxidative stress. And so this is something that helps greatly to reduce oxidative stress. There's a whole component of our innate immune system that heat shock protein stimulates and boosts, reduces free radicals, and the heat shock protein alone also aids in faster muscle recovery and repair, and then heart protection as well. There's many studies that I read, but I just wanted to highlight a few of the ones I thought were really interesting. Heat shock protein also helps in relieving chronic pain and depression. And in the studies, they saw that people who were depressed reported that they had an increased appetite, they had a sensation of a relaxed mood, and they had an alleviation from their depression, which is amazing. And it goes back to the fact that When we reduce stress in the body, it could be reducing physical stress, or we're doing something physical. We're sitting in a sauna, our body's sweating, right? It's actually affecting our emotional state, our mental state. It's helping us detox. It's having this anti-aging effect. It's having this really positive effect on the immune system and the cardiovascular system. So there's all these wonderful things happening all at once. As far as all the healing tools that I have collected over the years, the Sunlight and Sauna System is the one tool that does the most things. It's like the Swiss Army knife of holistic tools that I have, that I in my arsenal, that I use on a regular basis. Sometimes I'm going to use an oral health example. It was kind of life-changing for my oral health when I started using the tongue scraper, and I realized that your mouth has never been clean until you've used a tongue scraper. It's a game changer. The stuff that comes off your tongue twice a day is amazing. You should definitely get a metal tongue scraper. But that thing it does one thing, right? It just does one thing and it does it really well, and that's effective and I like it. And I have all kinds of health tools and biohacking health tools to help me just optimize my life that I use all the time. But the Sunlight and Sauna does over 20 things to the body. It's doing, and I'm learning more and more every time I look into it. I'm learning more and more about what this light and heat therapy does for my health. And so as far as investing in your health, you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck by using a tool on a daily basis that accomplishes all these different health results at once. Just like shifting your diet, all of a sudden, all these wonderful things are coming online. Epigenetically, your genes start expressing differently. When you change your diet, when you lower stress, your genes actually start expressing differently. Different enzymes start happening. Your body goes into this huge healing mode where it's able to finally deliver resources to healing and to repair and to restoring and regenerating. When you make you make this one change, this one switch, all these things come online. And that's what I've noticed with the Sunlighten system. I just wanted detox, but I've got so much more. So there's my 2 cents and then some. With inflation, I don't know, here's my $2 on on the Sunlighten system. Please, if you haven't already, join our Facebook group. I'd love to see you there. I'd love to chat with you if you have any questions or if you just want to share about your healing journey. So many of us are on our healing journeys together, and it's so great to come into a community and feel like you're not alone. So please join the Facebook group. I'd love to see you there. Say hi to me. And thank you for being a listener. Thank you for sharing these episodes with those you care about. And I can't wait for you to hear what's coming up. We got some great interviews in the pipeline that we're going to be publishing in the next month or so. So watch out for those and have yourself a fantastic rest of your day. And please do something today to love yourself.